What a special privilege it is for me to welcome all of you this afternoon to this, which is the 14th annual TD Canada Trust Walter Bean Visiting Lecture in the Environment. 14 years. That deserves a round of applause, I think, frankly. This lecture has become one of the largest and most anticipated annual lectures on this campus. I'd like to take this chance to thank our good friends at TD Canada Trust for their ongoing commitment to the professorship and to the University of Waterloo. I understand there are 8 representatives from TD here today. I'd like to thank you, each of you, as well as your TD colleagues who cannot be with us today, for your tremendous support and commitment to this program. Now, it is also my great pleasure to welcome our special presenter for this evening, Dr. Joe McGinniss, who's over here. Joe is a longtime friend of the university and of the faculty, and from everything I've seen and read, he is indeed a true Renaissance man, if ever there was one. I'll tell you more about Joe a bit later in the program. I know that Joe has prepared an amazing presentation for us, and I am really looking forward to it. So thank you, Joe, for joining us this evening. We are really pleased to have such a large crowd out to the lecture again this year. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to join us. One of the things that makes this event so unique and so successful is that it is shared by 3 faculties on this campus: engineering, science, and environment. This approach reflects Waterloo's collaborative team spirit and our understanding that finding answers to complex environmental problems cuts across disciplines, programs, and faculties. This year, the Faculty of Environment is thrilled to be your host for this afternoon. If you could indulge me for just a few minutes, I'd like to share a short update on some of the significant happenings that have occurred in the faculty over the last year. We have prepared a short 2-minute video to just show you some of these highlights of the past year's activities. So let's roll the video, please. I love that soundtrack. I don't know, it sounds like an old Western or something, rounding up Dogies. Well, we want to continue with the program. This past year, we had a very successful year. We launched the new Center for Ecosystem Resilience and Adaptation last October, you might recall, for those of you who were part of our experiences. We then launched the new School of Environment, Enterprise and Development, called SEED, on November 6th, with a crowd of over 400 guests, including Minister Tony Clement. This past June, the UW Summit Center for the Environment was completed in Huntsville as part of the G8 Summit proceedings. That's a beautiful facility. If you're familiar with Huntsville, it's up by the high school and the recreation center, overlooking Can Lake. It's currently being fitted out with laboratories for ecology, seminars and reading rooms, and dormitory space for up to 48 students and 4 faculty. It's a beautiful building. We're going to use that building to deliver a variety of undergraduate and graduate short courses, block courses, to support research in the field, research in the laboratory as well, for university undergraduates and graduate students, but also people with whom we have an affiliation and do similar research across Ontario and the country. So it's a great place to be for us. We're very much looking forward to that. It's opening mid-November. As you saw in the video clip, we are also building a new Environment 3 building, the third of our buildings. This will be a really, really special building. That is a 52,000 square foot building, and it's cantilevered over Environment 2 on pillars. Each of those spans that you saw going up in that video, it took a day and a half to raise that steel. Each span was 70 tons, and so it was quite a remarkable civil engineering feat and architectural feat. So we really are quite pleased with that. It will be ready by March 31st. The building will be complete by March 31st. And we will spend next spring and summer fitting it out with furniture and AV equipment and so forth, and ready to use next September at the start of the fall 11 term. This will be the first LEED Platinum building on this campus, the first LEED Platinum building in the region, and one of only 16 across the country. So we're very pleased to have this standard applied to this building. And we're doing it because we're committed to environmental issues, obviously, solving complex problems and leading by example and walking the talk. And one of the ways to do that is to have a really environmentally designed, really well-designed building. Some of the key features that we'll have in that building is that it will be powered by solar energy, solar power. We'll have a lot of energy conservation measures in it, gray water collection and reuse, rainwater recycling systems, and high-efficiency lighting. We'll have a 2-story living wall in the new atrium for air quality, which will be connected to the HVAC system. We'll have a fully functioning green roof, a constructed wetland on the grounds beside it, high-efficiency washroom fixtures, and in-floor heating using recycled heat from computers. I'm not sure how they're going to make that link quite, but it's an intrigue. It must be a pipe or something, I don't know. Very, very interesting stuff. So that's been what we've done up to the past year. I want to now turn to the rest of the program, if I may. As many of you know, this year's TD Canada Trust Walter Bean Professorship took a tragic turn just 2 short months ago when this year's visiting professor, esteemed climatologist Dr. Stephen Schneider, passed away suddenly in July. Our friend Joe McGinniss graciously stepped in a few weeks later to prepare today's keynote lecture, which you'll see in a few minutes. I do want to spend several minutes right now to talk about Dr. Stephen Schneider and to reflect on the significant impact he had on me individually, as well as our faculty members and our students while he was here this past May for a week. Dr. Schneider truly embodied everything this professorship is about. He came to Waterloo and he enlightened and he challenged us, and boy did he ever challenge us. For those of you who are part of those exercises, you'll recall the dynamism of his presentations and his interactions. He spoke to numerous classes while he was here on campus. He listened to and critiqued grad student presentations and projects. He sat on a panel of climate scientists from across the university. He answered questions from community guests and gave a thought-provoking talk for a large gathering of high school and university students at Waterloo. He also met individually with academic leaders, and he inspired all of us with his knowledge, sincerity, and most of all, I think, his passion for the environment and for climate change. He was a brilliant scientist, truly one of the best in the world, but he had a way of speaking, soft and calm for the most part, yet he certainly got his point across. He made each of us understand, as he would make you if you were standing here right now, as we had planned, But the problem of climate change is not a problem that can be solved by scientists alone. We all have a personal role to play and a stake in what he so poignantly called in his book, The Battle to Save the Earth's Climate. We are extremely fortunate to have Stephen Schneider's wife, Dr. Terry Root, here with us this afternoon. Dr. Root is an esteemed scientist herself, a senior fellow at the Woods Institute for the Environment, and a professor in the Department of Biology at Stanford University. Her own work focuses on large-scale ecological questions, investigating factors shaping the ranges and abundances of animals, primarily birds. Terry, thank you so much for traveling from California to be with us this evening. Could I ask you to please come up and say a few words? Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Terry Root.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for inviting Steve. I don't think I'm going to get through this, sorry. What I really want to do is I want to say how much he really, truly enjoyed being here. And so I would like to go through a little bit about him, just so that those of you who weren't able to see him before, you can get some sense of it all. So I'd like to talk about the leadership lessons from Steve. Steve reached many, many thousands of people through his scientific papers and his lectures. He talked about everything from dangerous climate change to engineering and management and to science and policy. He also gave public talks where his hands were always moving faster than his mouth, I think. It just stopped working, there we go. Through his books, he wrote several books. His first one, The Genesis Strategy, came out in the mid-70s, where he was already talking about climate change as an issue we need to be addressing, to his last book, Science is a Contact Sport, which I think we all have learned that indeed is the case, what science can be when you're working on climate change. He gave advice to 8 of the US administrations, even to George W. Bush, but guess what, he didn't listen. He also was very active in the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, which is an international body. He also was, some of the most important scientific contributions that he made were the effects of clouds on the climate, whether they were tall clouds or wide clouds, what happened in the difference. He also talked about aerosol particles and climate and how they interacted. He was very, very proud of the work that he did on quantifying uncertainty, because that's something that hadn't been done before. He worked with me on how the climate impacts plants and animals around the globe. He worked on policy options for adapting to climate change, so he was also working with policy. He also identified levels of the dangerous anthropogenic interference of climate change. And this was some of the work that he did at the IPCC. And Ben Sanders said, Stephen Henry Schneider will be remembered as one of the heroes of our age, as the man who helped nudge humanity into the path towards the more stable and sustainable climate future. Thank you so much for watching and listening.
Thank you so much, Terry. I know this cannot be easy for you. It has been a great deal to us to have you with us today and to be able to share the stories about Stephen and his impact with us. We are committed to helping to carry on this work in whatever way we can as a university community, and we certainly hope that you will stay connected with us, keep in touch, and visit us again. As I have said, Stephen had a profound impact on all of us when he was here in May. We wanted to pay tribute to him in some way as a formal part of this afternoon's proceedings. After his passing, his tragic passing, the accolades and testimonials certainly flooded in from all over the world. It was apparent then, if it wasn't before, that this man who visited Waterloo was no ordinary scientist. We pulled together some of the unbelievable tributes in a video montage. We hope it will give you a sense of his amazing life and work. Please watch and see for yourself.
I got started actually in engineering and plasma physics, and was at Columbia, and in the 60s there were a couple of minor little political events took place there, and that got me energized in dealing with public issues. Then Earth Day rolled around. There was a talk from Barry Commoner, and he argued that pollution dust could make the world colder and greenhouse gases could make it warmer, and I didn't believe that. So no, it can't be at that scale. So I looked into it, and there was only one class at Columbia that people were teaching on that. So the fellow who was teaching it was the #2 person in charge of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies. And he, after we worked together in this seminar, said, "I'll take a chance on you. If you'll take one on me, I'll give you a postdoc if you'll jump fields." So I did, and at that time, modeling the Earth's climate was something that had been done in about 3 places in the world, and there were about 10 or 15 papers worth reading. And that sort of was a lucky opportunity for me to be in the middle of things. And I learned about media and involvement in public issues back then. Nowadays, everybody's doing something about the weather, and nobody's talking about it. We could warm or cool, and that's cute, and people laughed just like that, and that was the end. And then I went back home to my lab, and I was still a postdoc at the time, and there's this article posted on the door of the map room, which is where the weather maps are. That's where everybody comes. This is the central place. And then stamped on it in a giant big stamp, bullshit. And of course, which was then used many times. And it was the article that Walter Sullivan from the New York Times wrote, because he was in the front row. I didn't know who the white-haired guy was, and he quoted that and so forth. And another thing that we, especially in the natural sciences, we really often make, to be blunt, fools of ourselves, going to Congress and so forth, and there's an economist sitting over here, and we'll make statements about policy really being absolutely clueless about the methods of what goes on. Policy analysis has a lot of discipline in it, and if we're going to talk about policy in the absence of understanding something about the nature of those sciences, then you don't help, often make it worse. So what we're trying to do here in the Aldo Leopold Leadership Program is 2 things. One, create a community of people of like mind so they can share that frustration and take it beyond frustration to doing something. And the second thing is learn the techniques. Learn how you communicate. Learn what communication is about. Learn that the audience, and knowing the audience, is more important than almost anything else, because you can't communicate with people if you don't know where they're coming from. Well, personally, I'm here because I am just delighted to see as many of my colleagues in mid and even senior parts of their careers saying, time to come out of the cloister as a 100% occupation, and let's get out in the real world, dirty and sometimes unpleasant as it is, and let's build a community of us so that we can reinforce each other while at the same time learning about people in industry and other groups whose activities are both the problem and the solution. And what I want to do is train the young future leaders so that when they go out and they start discussing a complex policy issue, they don't just out of the top of their head start talking about a cost-benefit analysis. They don't know what it is. So if we want to have quality in academics, we argue it should be quality in our disciplinary work. We also need to have quality in our outreach work. So for younger people, the key is go ahead and do things, but do them carefully, slowly, and build your skills so that you can not only be more effective, but you don't commit career side along the way, given the realities that the reward structure is still primarily on your scientific contributions early in your career.
The public world can't allow death. So we have what I call, we'll talk about it later, the double ethical bind. On the one hand, you want to make a difference in the world. On the other hand, you're a scientist, and that means you have to tell the whole story. The whole story means all the caveats. Well, I can tell you right now, it's impossible to do both. It can't be. Not in a 20-second soundbite, not in a 5-minute appearance before Congress. So the question then is it oxymoronic for us to even pretend that we can do popularization when the system constrains you to time limits that don't allow you to get close to the complexity of the problem?
And what's already dangerous for high mountain residents and people living in Hurricane Alley and in the Arctic and in fire-prone zones like the U.S. West. I mean, we're already at the point where the increased directly observed impacts look kind of dangerous. What's going to happen to precipitation in Scandinavia or in Kansas? We don't even know the sign. So there's always going to be an argument about what that means. And they take a look at how long it takes to replace energy systems and the political will needed and the investments, and they say, no way in 10 years. So it looks like 2 degrees is a heroic effort. So they picked a number that both have made some scientific sense in the impacts and at the same time looks like it's politically at least tractable with hard work. Not a bad idea. I just wanted us to remember that there's not automatic on that.
Here's the problem. There's still 30% of humanity responsible for a few percent of world emissions, called the poorest of the poor. IPCC and others have shown that they are the most vulnerable to change because they have the lowest adaptive capacity or the least developed economies. They're the ones who are using bad energy systems, very inefficient, and need to do leapfrogging, not just China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, and South Africa, but they have no horse to ride other than the UN framework process. So what I've been personally trying to do is advocate that if we're going to do this split into the coalition of the willing emitters, we also are going to have to still retain somebody who's going to take a look at the primary victims of the fact that most of the rich use the atmosphere as a sewer to get richer and are not helping the others. So I don't think the process is dead. I mean, it's just very, very slow to get progress because you've got, developing world saying we're going to hold the planetary sustainability agenda hostage to our notion of equity, and the rich countries saying we're going to hold the planetary sustainability agenda hostage to our notion of consumption. So we got a planetary sustainability train wreck. The signs of trouble, like intensifying hurricanes and increased percentages of wildfires and rapid heat waves and decreasing cold waves, despite one, Washington snowstorm means nothing, are happening at the rate or even faster than projected. So there's still a very deep concern whether the US media or Congress recognize it or not. If we do it cooperatively and get companies in China and the US, for example, to actually share profits and patents with little government funding to help the Chinese get over the hump, I think we can come up with a win-win. But to do that, we first have to have trust. Trust happens when you have understanding and negotiation. And the fact that the US refuses to do anything inside of Washington to, account for it being the largest accumulated historic emitter, this is just poisoning the waters, and it's largely the US Congress which defines the national interests by the special interests in their district, and the planetary interest isn't even on their radar screen. So what I try to do is live my lifestyle as best I can, and if we had implemented proper climate policy, it wouldn't be so necessary. So for the moment, there are probably a few thousand of us who are still stuck on those airplanes, destroying our health and not helping the planet's health, but at the same time hoping that what we're able to convince people to do will save more than we're wasting in the process. But I will never know empirically whether that's true. Just like It's a Wonderful Life. Remember when the Christmas movie with Jimmy Stewart, when he decides to commit suicide and they show how the world was different without him. We're not going to be able to run It's a Terrible Life on climate change with what happens with or without us. So all we can do is the best job we can of trying to convince people that we don't have much time left.
You would cry, so just look at them and sigh. And know they love you.
He was an incredible person. We were truly fortunate to have known him, to have had the opportunity to have him here at Waterloo as our guest. If I can, I'd like to now turn to the rest of the program this evening. To introduce this afternoon's speaker, Dr. Joe McGinniss, I want to invite Jeff McBoyle, Waterloo's interim provost and vice president academic, and a former dean of the Faculty of Environment, to say a few words of greeting on behalf of the university. Jeff was a long-time geography professor who taught many climatology courses himself. His distinguished teaching award suggests to me that he too has a passion for enlightening and inspiring students. Jeff, could I ask you to please come up and say a few words of welcome?
Thank you for that introduction, Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the University of Waterloo, I would like to welcome you all to the TD Canada Trust Walter Bean Lecture event. Thank you all for coming. At the University of Waterloo, we believe very strongly in the power of partnership, and the TD Canada Trust Walter Bean Visiting Professorship in the Environment has been a very valuable and enriching partnership for many years. The professorship provides our campus with an opportunity to be inspired by outstanding leaders in a variety of environmental fields. The visiting professors work with UW faculty members and students to enhance teaching and research programs at the university. The professorship seeks to promote Walter Bean's legacy of community involvement and commitment to youth, education, and community. Walter Bean's values are shared by this university, and on behalf of the University of Waterloo, I would like to say thanks to the family of Walter Bean for their participation in this great legacy. I would also like to thank TD Canada Trust for their visionary support of this initiative. Now, I would like to introduce a video message recorded by outgoing President David Johnson, who was unable to join us in person today. As, by this time, all of you know, President Johnson is being named Governor-General of Canada and is to be sworn in tomorrow. David served as president of the University of Waterloo for 11 years. He exemplifies the qualities that make Waterloo so special: the commitment to excellence, a collaborative spirit, and a global worldview. He has served the University of Waterloo with great distinction in so many ways with his vision, energy, and leadership, and now he will do the same for Canada. The University of Waterloo wishes him well in his future endeavor. Ladies and gentlemen, David Johnston. Could we roll the video?
I'm so sorry that I'm not with you in person. This is my last official day as president of the University of Waterloo, and in fact I'm in Ottawa preparing for my new job, which starts tomorrow, Governor General of Canada. I regret not being with you very much because the TD Canada Trust Walter Bean Lecture Series means a great deal to me, and about that in a moment. But first of all, I know that Dr. Stephen Schneider, the noted climatologist, was scheduled to speak and give this lecture today, and of course is not with us. I send my deepest condolences to Dr. Schneider's family. We will miss him deeply. My association with the TD Canada Trust Walter Bean Lecture Series goes back a long ways. It's been 14 years here, but I was a member of the Canada Trust Board when the Walter Bean Lecture Series was first proposed. It was in fact proposed by Doug Wright, who was president then. I was a board member, and I was so enthused about the idea that I asked to have the privilege of moving the motion to approve the gift from Canada Trust to the University of Waterloo to establish this lecture series in Walter Bean's memory. And of course, since that time, Canada Trust married with TD to become a wonderful, larger financial enterprise. And those great Canada Trust traditions, of course, continue today in TD Canada Trust. This is a lecture series that we treasure enormously, particularly because we have not only the lecture itself, which we will hear later today, but also the guest with us to interact in a variety of ways with our faculty and our students and to have an impact that is really very broad and deep and profound. And I take a special pleasure in welcoming Dr. Joe McGinniss as the lecturer this year. Joe is a dear old friend. Joe, in fact, was the honorary chair of the TD Canada Trust Environmental Foundation for a number of years, and of course did that superbly, as he has done everything else he's laid his hand to. I first met Joe when I went to him for advice, and I'm not sure if he'll remember it, but I had just become the founding chair of the Roundtable, the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy. And I took advice from learned people, and again, one name came to the fore, and that was Dr. Joe McGinniss. So I picked up the phone and in a rather tentative manner asked if I could go and see him. Well, he welcomed me as if I was long lost royalty. I went to his home. We sat in chairs across his workbench and began discussing some of the important lessons in sustainable development, which Joe, of course, had mastered long before the Brundtland Commission that gave birth to the National Roundtable, but provided us with some remarkably helpful advice in getting it started. All of you will know Joe for his work in the discovery of the Titanic. He was the first Canadian to visit the Titanic, and more recently his lectures and his analysis of drilling in the Gulf, and I believe he'll be telling us something about that in his lecture today. But Joe is one of those Canadians who you dream about. The Japanese have a title or an honor which is called National Living Treasures, where they actually honor the great heroes of their country before their demise. And if we had a National Living Treasure series in Canada, Joe, of course, would be one of the first members because he is truly that, a national living treasure. I'm sorry I'm not with you today to enjoy what he has to say, but I'll be with you in spirit, and I wish you another wonderful TD Canada Trust Walter Bean lecture, and welcome to Joe. Thank you.
Now there is an inspired choice for Governor General, I think. He will do well. I'd like to now introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Joe McGinniss. Joe is over here. Are you still here? That's comforting to me. He graduated in medicine from the University of Toronto, and following his internship, he was awarded a Link Foundation Fellowship to study diving medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. 2 years later, he became medical director of the American Man in Sea program funded by the United States Navy and the National Geographic Society. His research on the health and safety of commercial divers working on the continental shelf took him to offshore oil platforms in the North Sea and the Gulf of Mexico and the Santa Barbara Channel, I believe, as well, off California. Some years later, he's supported by the Canadian government. He led 10 undersea expeditions to the Arctic Ocean to develop the systems and techniques needed to work safely in the near-freezing water under the polar ice cap. He was the first scientist to dive under the ice at the North Pole. Please welcome a man who loves the ocean and has spent a lifetime exploring the dynamics of leadership and teamwork in lethal environments, Dr. Joe McGinniss.
Thank you, Mark. Hi. Look, I got to say this. In a room full of such intellectual firepower, I have to make a confession. And that is that I'm not as bright as Mark would have you believe. When I was at that big, grim university in downtown Toronto, I struggled with a number of my subjects. I had problems with anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, surgery, medicine. I'm happy to tell you that I graduated in the upper 94% of the class. Am I going too fast for them, do you think? Is this too fast? If you're having problems with a concept, I graduated in the half of the class that made the upper half possible. It's a stunning honor for me to be here on this stage for a whole lot of reasons. The first are the kind words from future Governor General, a man, by the way, who is about to find out that he has more friends than he ever knew, all of us wanting to have dinner in Rideau Hall. But what a choice, because here is a man who has all the great leadership qualities, including optimism, incredible ability to communicate. So I'm thrilled, and so the country is so fortunate. And Mark, it's quite wonderful to be in this room and to see the accomplishments, the achievements of the Faculty of the Environment over the past year. And when I look at that, I get the sense of what I call team genius, which is a leadership quality, which I'll come to later. But those accomplishments for the Faculty of the Environment did not happen by themselves. They happened because a whole lot of people got together and solved a whole lot of very serious problems. Where are the Canada Trust people? They're here. You guys are good, you know, for a whole lot of reasons which have already been spoken. But I had 6 years with the Friends of the Environment Foundation, 6 years as the chair, and boy, it was a glorious period of time for me. I had the chance to travel around the country and meet people who were really doing terrific things on behalf of the natural world, from Newfoundland to British Columbia, from cleaning up rivers to supporting raptors to building forests. It was an amazing experience for me. And it gave me some insight into a real quality that Ed Clark has. Ed was very much involved, this strategic imagination of his. He is a great leader. He's the guy who runs the bank, and a wonderful kind of broad spectrum thinker. But the real thing that really shook me, Terry, where's Terry? To be here, you know, and to see that, I'm so moved. Because obviously, Stephen represents the best of leadership, and we'll come a little bit to that later, but bless you for your courage to come here, and that was a moment. Okay. It is always an honor for me to be in the company of people who understand that the real assets of a well-lived life are not just in bank accounts, excuse me, or real estate, but the real assets of a well-lived life are in intellectual capital, in ideas, in innovation, in achievements, in enthusiasms, passions, values, and an attempt to make this a better planet. And so what I'd like to do for the next few moments is to explore a relationship that I'm still trying to understand between the ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and leadership. And to get there, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own long and still emerging relationship to this thing called leadership. As Mark mentioned in the introduction, as a young physician, I was very fortunate. I was the medical director of a company called Ocean Systems. It was the largest underwater engineering company in the world at that time. And as medical director, I was responsible for the health and safety of some 100 divers in the North Sea, the Santa Barbara Channel, and in the Gulf of Mexico. And they were young, hard-working, hard-drinking guys who every 2 weeks would go out and spend 3 weeks on an offshore oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, working on the blowout preventers and the pipelines. And then they would come home and celebrate. I got to tell you that some of my most difficult health and safety moments came at 2 o'clock in the morning, trying to wrestle these guys out of the bar to get them to the crew boats first thing in the morning so they could go to work. It was very difficult and dangerous work. They were breathing oxygen helium mixtures. They were diving to depths of 400, 500, 600 feet. And during that period of time, I treated decompression sickness, gas embolism, blunt force trauma, hypothermia. A few times I saw faces hardened with death. And during that period, early in my career, I came away with such an enormous respect for the forces of the ocean and how quickly they could tear apart the human body that I earned what I call my PhD in fear. And some of my friends, some of my colleagues gave me a nickname, Charlie Tuna, Chicken of the Sea. It was a time when I understood something about making decisions in high-risk moments, serious, quick decisions in high-risk moments, but I didn't know very much about leadership. Some years after, I was very fortunate, supported by the Canadian government. I led 10 expeditions up into the Arctic Ocean. Our focus was to develop the systems and techniques that would allow scientific and military divers to work under 6 feet of ice, that's 2 meters of ice, in waters that was near freezing temperatures. And over a period of time, we did some 600 dives in a whole lot of places, but from the Mackenzie Delta to the Northwest Passage to Baffin Island. And we were very lucky. We had some fine achievements. We built the first undersea polar station. We discovered the world's northernmost known shipwreck, and we, as Mark mentioned, made the first science dive under the ice at the North Pole. And looking back, I have to say that we were successful, not because of my brilliance as a leader, but because of the 5-star performance of my crewmates. They were amazing people. Scientists, biologists, and I was an accidental leader. I was making it up as I went along. I knew some of the traits of leadership, and I was good at them reasonably, and some I was not good at all. So, being fully aware of my lack of knowledge of this critical area of human behavior, I decided to commit myself to the study of leadership and teamwork in life-threatening environments. It was the time that the Titanic was just discovered, and I found myself working with the men whose machines, and the men and machines that were exploring 2 and 3 miles below the surface of the ocean. And I made my first dive to the Titanic in a French research sub, launched off a French oceanographic ship. And by the way, if you ever go to sea on a research sub, don't go with anybody except the French. These are not research ships, they're floating wine cellars. I had the good fortune to work with the Russian Academy of Sciences and make a 3-mile dive in the North Atlantic, a 2-mile dive in the Monterey Canyon, and my second dive to the Titanic. And recently, as Mark mentioned, I've had the good fortune to work with Jim Cameron, who we'll talk about later, on Jim's last 2 major expeditions for the Discovery Channel and for Disney. And spend months at sea with him on those expeditions, looking at the way the teams interact, who are the leaders within the teams, why are they successful, and it's been an extraordinary experience for me. My leadership interest has taken me to a number of areas. I've been many times to the Johnson Space Center to work with astronauts preparing for their next mission. Next week, I'll be on a Canadian Navy frigate in the Caribbean Sea. And in mid-November, I'm going to Afghanistan with the Canadian Forces on a leadership project. Well, why do I study this? For a whole lot of reasons, but one of them is that I believe, as Stephen believed, is that if we are to navigate the environmental choke points that are right upon us, we need to understand leadership and teamwork. And I have this list I call the 21 blind assassins. You're all familiar with them. Water shortages and drought, food shortages and famine, species extinction, the climate crisis, the ocean crisis. There's this long, long list that we're facing. And it seems to me that, yes, we look at them through the lens of technology, and we look at them through the lens of ecology. But one lens that's crucial in solving the problem, and Stephen alluded to it, is the lens of behavior. And this special area of behavior, personal, professional, political leadership. Now, it is very interesting, Terry. I was sitting there watching the video and thinking, wow, there are 12 leadership traits that I have come up with in this little odyssey that I'm on to try to understand its nature and I'd like to list them to you now. But as I do, it's clear to me that Stephen had all of them. Here they are, and I'll do it slowly. Of the 12, here are the 12. Some are writing. This is a good sign. Cool competence. Powerful presentations. Physical toughness. Mental resilience. All great leaders have these first 4 qualities. Also the second 4. Strategic imagination. Hot zone humor. High empathy communication. and enduring trust. And the final four: fierce ingenuity, team genius, resolute courage, and warrior's honor. Now, if you have 4 or maybe 5 of those qualities, chances are you're a pretty good leader. If you have 8 or 10 of them, chances are that you're a really good leader, and I want to talk to you after this presentation. In fact, I want to have my picture taken with you. If I'm honest, I try to be honest with myself occasionally, and if I'm honest with myself, I have to say that I'm an unfinished, incomplete leader. And there are many reasons for this. One of them is that I have this extraordinary concern for the safety of my crewmates. There are many examples of this. Here's one. I made my second dive to the Titanic, and as I mentioned, in the Mir submersible. You saw them in the first video there. They go to 20,000 feet, 6,000 meters, carry 3 people. And I was the co-leader of a $5 million expedition to film the Titanic in the IMAX format. We had the academic Keldysh, which was the world's largest research ship, which we chartered from the Academy in Moscow. And we had the 2 Mir submersibles. And most importantly, we had a team of 130 really talented individuals from a full range of science enterprises. And thanks to the team genius of the Russian sub-team, we made 17 dives. We did the first scientific study of the Titanic, and we made a film, an IMAX film, that's now been seen by 8 million people. During one of those dives, I found myself in the radio room when we lost contact with the 2 Mir subs. Now, we're on a ship. They're 2.5 miles below us in the wreck somewhere. And for the first time in 6 years, we can't get any radio contact with them. And I remember in that room sending out the first call, and normally we get a response right away. Everything's okay. Well, you know, we do this every 15 minutes or so just to make sure as the operation proceeds. Well, the second call went out, the third call went out, the fourth. And by the 5th, my heart was up to Mach 2, because I could imagine some of the things that were happening. Maybe a section of the Titanic's rusting hull had collapsed on the 2 subs, which are only 6 meters long, with 3 people inside each one of them. Or perhaps their oxygen system had gone down. So my mind went into bad diagnosis overdrive. And then I looked up and saw every eye in the room looking at me as the leader for what should we do next. So I thought, oh boy, let's think about this for a moment. These sub-pilots are the best in the world at what they do. We've got to trust the team and the technology, so if they're going to solve the problem, they will, or they will call on us for help eventually. And when they do, we have to be cool and we have to be competent. So I eased my finger off the panic button and waited, put on my leadership face and waited. Waited 10 minutes. It's the longest 1.5 years of my life. And then we got a call, and the call came in the form of an apology. They had driven the subs underneath the overhanging stern of the Titanic. They hadn't realized that the overhanging stern was in the way of the ship, and they couldn't, their signals, and they were so intense on what they were doing, trying to photograph the Titanic's propellers, that they lost track of everything except what they were doing, and so they came out apologizing, and whoa, we felt totally relieved at that. A few weeks ago, I went down to the Gulf of Mexico. I went for 2 reasons. One, to see if the impact on one of the coastal communities, and 2, to look hard at the performance of the group of men who helped solve the problem and cap the well. My first stop was in Grand Isle, Louisiana. It's a 5-mile-long sand spit of an island in the Mississippi Delta. It's 1,500 souls live in small wooden houses on hurricane pilings, and they make a good living from the sea as shrimpers and fishers and charter boat captains. As I drove into town, there were hand-painted signs on both sides of the road saying, "Give us our beach back, BP," and "How the hell are we going to feed our kids?" The marinas were empty, and down at the beach it too, was empty except for guys wearing orange vests and white hazmat suits. A lone helicopter circled overhead, and down by the edge of the ocean, front-end loaders were picking up sand and carrying it over to a 100-foot-long, all-black sand scrubber. I spoke to a shrimp fisherman. He told me that the oil had gone deep beneath the surface sand, and there was no way they were ever going to get it all out. I went down to the edge of the Gulf in the evening as the sun was going down, and I tried to imagine what it was like out there about 50 miles where it's 5,000 feet deep. Of course, it's lethal to human beings. It's forever dark. There's no oxygen to breathe. The temperatures are near freezing, the water temperature down there. And of course, at that pressure, the pressure bends steel. And last April, as you all know, when that well broke open and oil started thundering out, it created a toxic killing field that took the lives of trillions of creatures, from whales to sharks to big fish, small fish, larvae, and plankton. And when it reached the surface and spread out at one point, covering an area almost the size of Lake Ontario, it blew a black hole in the livelihoods of thousands of people along that shoreline. And I stood there and I thought, oh boy, if I'm honest with myself, I have to recognize the fact that I'm complicit. All my life I've been using fossil fuels to heat my house, drive my car, fly in airplanes, and if the truth be known, I'm a hydrocarbon addict. I'm trying to recover, I'm trying to kick it. I ride my bike, I walk, I take the subway in Toronto, I drive a hybrid car, but I still leave a large hydrocarbon footprint. And I stood there and realized that the oil was on that beach in part because of me. And I tried to imagine that burned out billion-dollar oil rig lying on its side in the sediments out there, 5,000 feet. It struck me that perhaps the horizon is the Titanic of this century. Here we have two multi-million-dollar vessels with fail-safe technology and highly trained people operating them. We have senior officers and officials making serious mistakes and decisions and shortcuts that cost lives and sent the vessels to the bottom of the ocean. In both of these disasters, there is ignorance and arrogance and creeping complacency. Well, every dark story has some good white hats and good guys in it, so the next day I went to Morgan City to meet them. And I went to a company called Oceaneering International, and Oceaneering is the company that runs those ROVs, as they're called, remotely operated vehicles that you all saw on television. And I spoke to the intense, soft-spoken pilots of the machines. They showed me their machines, by the way. They're about the size of a compact car, $5 million a piece. They've got a spectrum of, constellation of lights, 5 cameras, including an HD camera, thrusters. But their main feature are these 2 mechanical arms that can push and pull and twist and grab. And they are flying toolboxes. And they perform hundreds of tasks underwater, operated from the surface, but deep, a mile below the surface. Hundreds of tasks, from inspection to cutting pipe to bolting flanges together. The guys are very interesting, the pilots. They're all in their 30s and 40s. They're from Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana. They're the kind of older version of video gamers, except they're much more than gamers. They are technical troubleshooters. These are self-taught engineers who know every humming inch of their electrical, mechanical avatars. They can fly them and they can fix them in their sleep. They operate in a world with a considerable risk. In the summer, the temperature in the Gulf of Mexico is flamethrower hot. The humidity is like breathing soup. These guys are surrounded by heaving decks and slippery stairwells, overloaded cables, and overheated generators. Their machines are constantly attacked by seawater and corrosion. And they have thousands of electrical connections and 3,000 volts trying to get out and find a soft pink body. During the 3 months that BP had this problem, these guys, there were 50 of them, 50 pilots, about 16 machines, 24/7, non-stop. And on 12-hour shifts, they flew 15,000 hours. They were involved in almost every single task that occurred underwater as the kind of eyes and the ears and the hands for the BP managers. For the exhausted engineers at BP, these guys, the flying toolbox teams, were the 5th Cavalry flying in on rotating propellers. And they embody a leadership quality, team genius, which I mentioned earlier, which is the mastery of fast, elegant, shared solutions to overcome seemingly impossible problems. I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I think instead of waiting till my presentation is all over, I'm going to save a nice story, and we're going to have, if anybody's interested, a couple of questions. Anybody interested in a question on the BP side, or? Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay, the question was dispersants on the environment. A lot of dispersants were used. I don't know how many thousands of gallons. And for the first time ever used underwater, near the wellhead they were, and some of these guys did that. So we just know that it's, so many people said not to do this. And as with the future of the Gulf, nobody's going to know for a year, 2, 3 years, the health of this, the 9th largest body of water in the world. It's a big question mark. A lot of science is going on now. Organizations like Harbor Branch, Gulf Coast institutions, Woods Hole, they're all now trying to assess the health of the patient. And the dispersants were not a good thing. Should not have happened. It's the consensus. Any other questions? Just a couple? Yes. One of the things that infuriated me, where did the oil go? One of the things that infuriated me, made me very angry, was that we all seemed to talk, or BP led us to think only in terms of the surface slicks and sheens, which were very, very important. But everybody at BP didn't say anything about what was happening from the seabed to the surface. There's a mile of water in there. This is where the real killing fields took place. And I was furious because for the first 6 weeks, we never saw any video. And then we began to see it every day. But they wouldn't, the criminals were in charge of the crime scene. And they wouldn't let us see what was going on. They wouldn't let the scientists from Woods Hole and these other institutions go in and put the cameras up and start to do the measurements that would give us a much better indication. That, by the way, is not going to happen ever again. If there is something like this, and this is what Jim Cameron did so beautifully, by pulling us all together, we wrote a report, and one of the first things is the scientific community is going to be engaged in anything like this that happens right from the get-go. Any other questions? Did I answer that at all? No. That's typical of me. Usually I get rambling on here and forget. The oil, I think, they say that a lot of it has evaporated. They say some of it was collected. But I think it's on the seabed and in the water column. I think there are these microscopic droplets that are out there. And the truth is that we really don't know. Nobody knows for sure. But a big portion of it has to be in that water column from the surface to the seabed. Yes. And you, big, good-looking guy. Well, I don't know whether you heard, but they ran a relief well in and they killed it from the, it's called they did a top kill and then they did a bottom kill as well. So effectively, They went into the casing down below the seabed and they cemented it in there, so it's been killed from the top and the bottom. So what happens now on the top is, in a sense, irrelevant. It's been killed down below. Yes? I tremble. I tremble. That's a bottle of wine and some serious conversation. First of all, yes, I did some work in the Arctic. I'm very concerned if we start drilling there, we won't be, we just won't, if something like this ever happened in the Arctic, there's no way we'd be able to respond to it effectively because of the ice, because of the temperatures. In a way, the blowout in the Gulf of Mexico happened in a, if you will, convenient place because it's warm water, air temperatures are warm as well, so the oil moved and evaporated, and there was good response from all those ports around the Gulf. But if it happens up in the Beaufort Sea, or there's a well being drilled north of Hibernia in water twice as deep, if it happens out there, we just won't have the response capabilities, and it'll be a disaster. I think I better continue because they're going to kill me if I don't. I get one story. I wanted to finish with a kind of upbeat story, and this has to do with two leadership qualities that I'm fascinated with: physical toughness and mental resilience. The story goes like this. Not long ago, the Discovery Channel asked us if we would do a live broadcast from the Titanic and to celebrate their 20th anniversary. It would be a $7 million project. We would dive down, we would land on the upper decks of the Titanic, and from inside the crew cabin of the subs, we would run these small robots down into the interior of the Titanic and bring back video images of rooms that hadn't been seen for almost a century. What we had to do was to get the video image from the robot back up to the sub, up through 2.5 miles of water, to the surface ship, then to a satellite 350 kilometers above, then down into 10 million living rooms. Technically, it would be the most difficult live broadcast ever. And the reason for this is that water, seawater, is 1,000 times denser than air. So we had 300 days to design, build, and test a surface-to-seafloor communication system with thousands of moving parts. And its main component was a very thin fiber optic cable that would be spooled out from a drum as the sub descended and landed on the Titanic. And of course, with wind and waves and currents, you could very easily snap the cable. That's why in 200 years of submarine operations, something like this had never been done before. So we arrive on the Titanic site with some great assets. We've got the Keldysh again, our workhorse. We've got the 2 Mir subs. We've got these 4 brand new small video cam robots. And we've got a wonderful team of 150 people who are really talented. And we have 7 dives before the live broadcast, 7 rehearsal dives. And the objective is, in those rehearsal dives, we will learn how to deploy the communication system. And we will get some footage from unseen rooms to edit into the final film. From the very first dive, things began to go wrong. When we deployed the surface-to-seafloor communication system, the video cam robots crashed because they were new and because of the pressure. When we got the robots working, we broke the cable. And when we got both systems working, we burned out the satellite dish, and the airdrop that you saw was the bringing in spare parts for the satellite dish. By the 4th dive, we were in the midst of a 24/7 ultra-marathon of failure, frustration, fatigue. There was always the risk of entanglement with the wreck. At one point, we had 3 of the 4 new video cam robots were not functioning. And in Washington, sensing a commercial flameout in front of millions of viewers, the Discovery Channel executives were thinking seriously of canceling the entire project. The pressure on the ship, the stress on the ship was enormous, and in fact it was so great that one member of the broadcast team, a guy who had been with the Olympics and the Super Bowl, who'd seen everything. But his brain went into cognitive lock, and he spent 3 hours staring a hole in a wall. And another guy, his brain cooked off to such a high temperature that the only way he could cool it down was with a steady stream of ice-cold vodka. It's at times like this that you pray for a leader with two qualities: physical toughness and mental resilience. And we had one. His name was Jim Cameron. This was Jim's expedition. Now, you know Jim as the guy whose films have won some 19 Academy Awards. He's also an acclaimed deep-sea explorer. He's done 6 major expeditions. By the way, he's an ardent environmentalist since Avatar has been released. He's been down to the Brazilian rainforest to help the First Nations people there stop the building of the world's 3rd largest dam. And as we speak right now, he's just been up to Alberta and the tar sands. He's got some things he wants to understand about what we're doing up there. He's a very serious environmental guy and a great storyteller and a great asset on behalf of the natural world. But Jim is so tough that when he gets in the water, the sharks take cover. When this thing was going down out there on the Atlantic Ocean with bad weather coming over the horizon, Jim was tight-lipped, optimistic, participated in every dive, went around to everybody on the ship and said, look, you guys, we can do this. We can make it possible. We can make it work. So inspired by Jim, our mantra was keep calm and keep going. Nobody slept. Nobody bitched. We just decided that what we would do is we would give it our very best shot and that we would live with the consequences. By the 6th dive, Jim was running out of options. He knew that to salvage the show, what he had to do was somehow get a video cam robot into a room that no one had seen for almost 100 years and come back with some footage that would be put into the final film. And so with 3 of the 4 robots out of commission, he decided to gamble on trying to get down and getting his camera into the Strauss suite. You remember maybe from the film, this is the suite where Jack sketches Rose. Just before the dive, I had a conversation with Jim about the possibility of failure. And he looked at me with those blazing blue eyes and said, failure, even repeated failure, can be crowned by success if we persist, if we stay the course. And the reason he were standing here right now, the reason he would say the reason we were successful was because 150 people on that team were professional and optimistic and tireless. As I look back on 20 years of trying to understand the dynamics of leadership, it seems to me that leadership is not just driven by intelligence, but it's really driven by empathy and enthusiasm. An intense empathy for the team and the task and the technology, and a sustained enthusiasm for whatever it takes to get the job done. And you know what I mean, because a sustained enthusiasm for getting the job done is part of the DNA of this university, and certainly a part of the DNA of the Faculty of Environment. This is where there is the expression of a grand love for the air and the ocean and the land. And so it seems to me that our challenge as individuals and as a community is to understand the dynamics of leadership, to develop them in ourselves, and to enhance them in other people. I'm going to leave you with a final thought, and that is that when you're 2.5 miles underneath the surface of the ocean, 4,000 meters, and it's cold, and it's dark, and help is hours away, there are 2 fundamental rules, and you know them because they define the relationship between you and this university and you and the natural world. The first rule is take care of each other, and the second rule is take care of each other. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
That was first rate. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Really well done. Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much. We have time for 2 or 3 questions. Anybody wish to ask him any aspect of the presentation, or this middle row here?
Having to do with leadership that you're studying, what was it that prompted he not to say anything for so long?
Yeah.
Lawyers. I'm serious. It was that they didn't want to say anything that was going to put them in some kind of vulnerable position financially. This, by the way, this whole thing was driven by financial concern. They were 43 days overdue on the well. They had spent far too much money. They were trying to close down the well. And so they took shortcuts. And there was questions about the cementing, there was questions about the casing size, and they were in a hurry to get off the well and go on and do something else. So they compromised, took shortcuts. And I think their initial response was, don't say anything, guys. We all thought, they might clean this thing up in a couple of days, because the blowout preventer is actually supposed to work. And now that it's up and people are taking a look at it, it's been recovered, it's on the bottom, including the FBI are looking at that blowout preventer, trying to find out why didn't it work at that time. So but I've never seen anything surrounded by so many lawyers as this one.
This chap here.
We read in one of our classes an article about recently found oil on the seafloor.
Yes.
If there is found in this found frequency of BP, so what can companies do to clean that oil?
One thing, that's a good question. He's asking about oil on the seabed in the area. There is, by the way, naturally occurring oil on the seabed of the Gulf of Mexico. Oil seeps up. And in fact, there are some extraordinary communities of life that are dependent and related to this. So in terms of where it is and cleaning it up, I don't think anybody knows right now. It's so difficult to operate a mile down there with subs or with ROVs. So I think what's going to happen is that if the oil is on the seabed, it's probably going to stay there and be decomposed by the bacteria that work on these seeps.
One more question.
Yeah. That's a very good question. I think it's. Can
you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, we've got a lack of leadership in all levels of society. How do we improve that? I'll pitch the question here. We're at a university. Is leadership taught anywhere in this university? The answer is probably no. Because for all of us, we become accidental leaders. We are in business or in academia. We kind of learn by osmosis, by example. And when I finish this book, one of my ambitions is to come back here and say, look, could we have a little place where leadership is actually taught? I mean, it is a behavioral thing that has a nature and dynamics, and maybe people would like to know. And my 12 traits, by the way, are just mine. There are others, I am sure. But it's a very good question. I think leadership, there should be places that you can go to and learn about leadership. And I'll say this very quickly. Leadership is extremely complex. That's the first thing, because it's skills that are operating at several levels, singly and sometimes simultaneously, in all good leaders. It's essential. There is no decision. None of the successes that have happened in the faculty have happened without some kind of leadership. So it's essential to every project, big and small. And it cannot be learned except in the line of fire. What can be learned is examples of good leadership that we can read about or can be talked about, and we can see it in people like Obama. We can see it in Hayward. As a poor leader, this guy from BP, was that Was that a junk shot on leadership? I mean, he was amazing. The positive side was Commander Allen, who was Coast Guard. He was a great leader. So it's all around us. Just take a look at it, try to learn about it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much for your questions, and thank you, Joe, for your insights. I want to draw the afternoon to a close, the session to a close, if I might, by thanking Terry Root for being here with us and for joining us with this presentation. Terry? I'd like to thank our colleagues at TD Canada Trust very much for their support. 14th year of this program. Thank you, guys. And to Jeff McBoyle from the University of Waterloo Senior Administration as well for helping us host you. And to all the staff from the Dean's Office and the Faculty of Environment generally who have helped put this program on. Thank you so much. So ladies and gentlemen, that really does conclude the presentation, the afternoon's activities. Thank you very much indeed for coming this year. Thank you.